You're listening to 105.3, The Gerblin, Dominaria's #1 music source for generic goblin noise.
Hey gang, using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCG Player. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin Gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game is a special installment brought to you by Trevor. He took his camera and filmed his New York crew, and we have 3 new friends added to the channel. First up, Michael is playing Alela, keeping a Dimir Signet, Mana Confluence, Snow-Covered Plains, Misty Rainforest, Ancient Den, Sai, and Sensei's Divining Top. Elijah is playing his Glissa deck, keeping a Soul Ring, Reliquary Tower, Snow-Covered Forest, Snow-Covered Swamp, Command Tower, Commander's Sphere, and Crucible of Worlds. Daniel has borrowed Trevor's Kruphix deck, keeping a Mystical Tutor, Aestheticism, Cultivate, Hydroid Crassus, Mana Crypt, Polluted Delta, and Hinterland Harbor. Last but not least, Trevor is playing Zurgo, keeping an Urborg, Temple of Malice, Mountain, Rugged Prairie, Sword of Feast and Famine, Enlightened Tutor, and Return to Dust. Michael wins the die roll and starts us off. Michael plays a Misty Rainforest, cracking it and announcing he'll grab a Shockland, meaning he'll lose 3 life total. He shortcuts and puts out his Sensei's Divining Top before finding the land. Elijah plays a Command Tower and casts his Soul Ring. Trevor plays a tapped Temple of Malice and scries 1, bottoming the card. Daniel plays a Polluted Delta and sacrifices to find a land, and he passes while searching. Michael plays a Snow-Covered Plains and pays 2 for Dimir Signet. Elijah has a Snow-Covered Forest for his land drop, and he taps out for a Vidalcan Orrery. Trevor plays a Plains and passes. Dan plays a Hinterland Harbor and casts a Mana Crypt. He then cultivates and passes. Michael plays a Scalding Tarn, sacrificing it and losing 1 to find a land. He finds a Hollowed Fountain, losing another 2 so it'll come in untapped. He then taps out in his main phase for Alela, and he passes turn. Elijah plays a Snow-Covered Swamp and taps 5 for a Seedborn Muse. This is a little bit frightening with the Orrery out. At the end of turn, Trevor casts Enlightened Tutor and reveals a Chromatic Lantern and put it on top. To save some time, especially since he's drawing it, Trevor waits to shuffle and instead plays an Urborg as his land drop and casts a Lantern before passing and shuffling. At the end of turn, Elijah flashes in a Commander's Sphere and then his copy of Sensei's Divining Top. He activates his top before he moves to Daniel's turn. Daniel rolls for the Crypt and doesn't take any damage. He plays a Forest and then plays out Kruphix. Daniel then passes, and at the end of turn, Elijah taps his top to draw a card. He puts the top on top. He then flashes in from beyond, and we move to Michael's turn, with Elijah untapping again. Michael plays an Ancient Den, and pays 3 for Sai, Master Thopterist. He then activates his Signet to cast a Talisman of Hierarchy, which gets him an Alela trigger, giving him a 1/1 fairy token and a Thopter from Sai. Moving to combat, he swings Alela at Elijah in the air. Alela connects, dealing 2 commander damage, while Michael gains 2. At the end of turn, Elijah sacrifices From Beyond and tutors for an Eldrazi card. He reveals Worldbreaker and puts it to hand. Elijah starts his own turn, not that every other turn hasn't been to some extent an extra turn for him, and he plays a Reliquary Tower as his land drop. He then swings the Seedborn Muse at Trevor for 2. The Muse connects, and in Elijah's second main phase, he plays a Crucible of Worlds and passes. Trevor untaps as does Elijah, and in his main phase, Trevor plays a Mountain and then pays 4 to cast Return to Dust. Since it's his main phase, he can hit 2 targets, picking the Orrery and the Soul Ring sitting on Elijah's side of the board. Elijah responds with the targets on the stack by tapping most of his mana to flash in Worldbreaker, who on cast, exiles Kruphix. The artifacts then get exiled, and Trevor passes. Daniel draws, and Michael activates his top to look at his top 3. Daniel then plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Eldrazi as it enters, and he remembers his Crypt roll, and successfully rolls to avoid taking damage. Daniel then taps out completely to cast an All is Dust, and the board wipe resolves. Michael plays a Mana Confluence and taps out, losing 1 to play a Windreader Sphinx. He He then moves to combat, swinging the Thopter at Dan and drawing a card from his attacking Flying Thopter. Elijah plays a Llanowar Wastes, paying 1 for Nile Spellbomb. He then brings out Glissa the Traitor, and he passes turn. Trevor plays a Rugged Prairie and casts Thalia, Heretic Cathar. He follows up with a weapon for her, playing a Sword of Feast and Famine, which seems like a great answer for Elijah. Daniel rolls and loses 3 to his Crypt Trigger. He then draws, with Michael using his top on the draw step. Daniel then taps out for a Hydroid Crassus, where X is 5. He gains 2 life and draws 2 cards from it, and Trevor reminds him that it's tapped. Daniel then passes. Michael taps enough to recast a tapped Alela in his main phase, and then plays out an Orzhov Signet, gaining a tapped fairy token from Alela's trigger. Moving to combat, he swings his flyers once more at Daniel, gaining to draw 2 cards and deal 4 damage. Michael then plays a tapped Marsh Flats in his post-combat main phase, and at the end of turn, Elijah activates his Nile Spellbomb. He pays the 1 black from his triggered ability to draw a card, and he exiles Michael's yard. Elijah taps his Snow-Covered Forest in his main phase to cast Arkham's Astrolabe, drawing a card as it enters. We then see a Chromatic Star, and I'm wondering if he's playing eggs. Elijah then sacrifices the star, making 1 mana of his choice, and draws as it goes to the yard. We then move to combat, and Michael gets attacked for 8. In his post-combat main phase, Elijah plays out a tapped Glacial Chasm, and he sacrifices a Snow-Covered Swamp. He then passes turn. Trevor plays a Marsh Flats for turn, and then plays Balin, Wandering Knight. He moves the Sword of the Feast and Famine onto Thalia, and going to combat, swings her at Michael. Thalia connects for 5, and Michael discards a card while Trevor gets to untap his lands. Daniel rolls for his Crypt and avoids the damage. He recasts Kruphix in his main phase before passing turn. Michael untaps and activates his top on his upkeep. He then draws for turn after rearranging his top 3, and casts his copy of Tezzeret, Artifice Master. He uses the 0 cost ability and draws 2 cards as he controls 3 or more artifacts. He then plays an untapped basic, and plays out Heraldic Banner, naming blue as it enters. Heading to combat, Alela goes at Daniel, while the fairy token heads at Trevor. Daniel blocks with Krasis, and the creatures trade, with Michael gaining 3 life, and Trevor then takes the hit for 2 from the unblocked fairy. With the Krasis dying, Glissa triggers, and Elijah brings back his Nile Spellbomb from the yard to hand. Michael also remembers he should have drawn 2 from the Windreader Sphinx's triggers. Michael then sacrifices one of his fetch lands to go and find a land and pass his turn. On his upkeep, Elijah pays for his Glacial Chasm cumulative upkeep trigger by paying the life. He draws for turn and places a Snow-Covered Swamp from his yard to the field. Elijah then taps the Chasm for black thanks to Trevor's Urborg, and recasts his Nile Spellbomb. We then see Elijah casting a Workshop Assistant, and passes turn, remembering to tap it. Trevor plays a Mountain, and taps out for Abyssin, Angel of Hope. She resolves, and moving to combat, Thalia goes at Daniel. Daniel takes the hit for 5, discarding a card, while Trevor untaps his lands. In his post-combat main phase, Trevor then moves the Sword of Feast and Famine over to Abyssin. He then casts Zurgo and passes. At the end of turn, Daniel floats 1 colorless mana and keeps it around with Kruphix. Daniel rolls for his Mana Crypt, succeeding and not taking damage, while Michael activates his top. Daniel then plays a tapped Eldrazi Temple, and plays out a copy of Mana Reflection. He then passes turn. Michael upticks Tezzeret to make a tapped Thopter, and then casts Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. He upticks that walker, dealing 8 damage to each opponent, which in the case of Elijah is actually 0. He does 8 damage to Trevor and Daniel though, and gains 8 life. Heading to combat, Michael then attacks Daniel in the air for 1, and Michael also draws a card from the Sphinx. Michael then plays a tapped Evolving Wilds, which is just awful, and he plays a Bitter Blossom and passes. At the end of turn, Elijah activates his Spellbomb and exiles Daniel's yard. Elijah takes 4 in his upkeep to his Glacial Chasm and draws. He plays a Snow-Covered Forest for turn and casts a Plaguecrafter. With the creature on the stack, Michael casts Generous Gift and targets Glissa. Elijah sadly puts Glissa back to the command zone, and the Plaguecrafter then enters tapped. Trevor sacrifices Zurgo, while Michael lets a Thopter go. Elijah decides to let the assistant go to the yard and returns the Nile Spellbomb to hand as it dies. Elijah then recasts Glissa, who enters tapped, and Daniel finally decides on what he wants to discard, pitching what I think looks to be a From Beyond. Trevor recasts Zurgo in his main phase and heads to combat. His whole team goes at the bridge-loving Tezzeret, and not wanting to sacrifice anything needlessly since Tezzeret seems like he's going to get taken out either way, Michael just lets the Planeswalker go. Trevor then passes, and Daniel makes 2 mana using one of it for Mystical Tutor and floating the other one on Kruphix. He finds and puts to top a Cyclonic Rift and moves to his turn. Daniel rolls for his Crypt, failing and losing 3, and then draws the Rift for turn. He uses Kruphix floating mana and taps the Crypt for 4 colorless to help overload the Rift. With the Rift on the stack, when he gets priority, Elijah sacrifices his Commander Sphere to draw a card. The board then gets bounced. Daniel then taps some more mana and he casts Epiphany at the Drown Yard where X is 8. He targets Trevor with the spell and reveals his cards to make the piles. There's a lot of lands there, and Trevor gives him the pile of 4 cards, most of which are lands, and one of which is Seasons Past. Daniel then passes. Michael recasts his Dimir Signet, and then his Orzhov Signet, and then his Talisman of Hierarchy. He then recasts the Heraldic Banner again, naming blue as it enters, and then the top comes back, followed by a Bitter Blossom. Michael then plays a tapped Arcane Sanctum as his land for turn, and passes. Elijah doesn't pay the Chasm cost on his upkeep, and lets it go to the yard. He recasts the Arcane Astrolabe during his main phase, and draws a card as it enters. He then plays a Mycosynth Wellspring, and goes to find a basic once it enters. He reveals a Snow-Covered Forest, and then recasts his Nile Spellbomb once more. He sacrifices it and exiles Daniel's Yard, and pays the 1 black to draw from the ability as the Spellbomb is sacrificed. Elijah then plays a Snow-Covered Forest, which, with Urborg out, might as well be a Bayou, and he pays 1 into each X of Hangerback Walker. It comes in with a +1/+1 counter, and he passes. Trevor's turn has him casting Chromatic Lantern again, and then Thalia, Heretic Cathar. We then see the Sword of Feast and Famine, and a tapped Godless Shrine before Trevor passes turn. At the end of turn, Daniel floats 2 more mana onto Kruphix. Daniel rolls for his Crypt, taking 3 again. He then plays a Forest, and only has to tap a few lands for Jin-Gitaxias. Thanks, Mana Reflection. Jin-Gitaxias does enter tap though. He then casts Swiftfoot Boots, and puts them onto his tapped Jin-Gitaxias. He then taps out using the last of his mana from Kruphix to help cast his copy of Worldbreaker. It exiles Elijah's Reliquary Tower on cast, and he passes, drawing 7 at the end of turn. Michael loses 1 life from the Bitter Blossom, and gains a Fairy Rogue token who comes in tapped. He then activates his top before moving to his draw step, and looks at his top 3. In his main phase, we see Tezzeret, Artifice Master again, and Michael then follows up with his own copy of Cyclonic Rift. It resolves as well to the misery of the table, and Michael then uses Tezzeret's Zero ability to draw 2 cards. Elijah casts his Astrolabe again for the 3rd time this game, drawing another card, and then playing Urborg of his own. He then casts Expedition Map, and follows up with his recasting of Crucible of Worlds. He plays his Mycosynth Wellspring again, and finds another Snow-Covered Forest, and passes to Trevor. Trevor plays his Bloodstained Mire for turn, and then his Chromatic Lantern again. Thalia then rejoins the fray, followed by the Sword of Feast and Famine. He equips it onto Thalia, and passes to Daniel. Daniel rolls for the Crypt, and avoids taking damage. He plays a Forest, and Trevor highlights that Daniel is about 5 failed Mana Crypt triggers away from death. Daniel then recasts Jin-Gitaxias, who comes in tapped. He draws his fresh 7 at the end of turn, and decides what to discard while he passes to Michael. Michael loses another life for a tapped Fairy Rogue, and draws for turn. He then activates Tezzeret's Zero ability again, drawing 2, and plays a Snow-Covered Swamp. The Windreader Sphinx then returns, and Mystic Confluence hits the stack. He bounces Jin-Gitaxias, Thalia, and draws a card. Moving to combat, the older Fairy Rogue token goes at Elijah. He draws a card as it attacks, and then deals 1. Michael then casts a Mox Opal in his second main phase, and passes turn. Elijah plays a Snow-Covered Forest, and casts his Trading Post. He recasts the Hangerback Walker so that it comes in with a +1/+1 counter again, and Daniel finishes discarding. Elijah then sacrifices the Hangerback Walker to the Trading Post, and returns his Nile Spellbomb to hand. He also gains a Thopter token from the Walker dying. Elijah then recasts the Nile Spellbomb, and passes. Trevor recasts Thalia again, and then Balin, and passes turn. Daniel rolls for his Crypt trigger, and avoids taking the damage. He plays Castle Vantris, which comes in tapped because of Thalia, regardless of Daniel's island or tropical island. Michael then puts to stack Bowl of Chocolate-Covered Almonds, which Elijah is quick to commandeer. Daniel then puts to stack an Ugin the Spirit Dragon, who resolves. He downticks it by 7 to exile all colored permanents that cost 7 or less, and most of the table is happy to be rid of Thalia. Daniel then passes while Michael activates his top. Michael plays a Vault of Whispers and taps his Mox Opal for 1 white. This pays for an Enlightened Tutor, which finds him a Bolas Citadel, and Michael puts it on top of his library. He then casts Cryptic Command, choosing to draw a card, and returns the sword to Trevor's hand. We then see an Aetherflux Reservoir, which Daniel moves to counter with Counterspell. Michael responds to this with a Flusterstorm, and has enough storm copies to counter the counter. The reservoir resolves, and Michael then lands his Bolas' Citadel. He's able to gain a ton of life by putting the Sensei's top back on top, and then recast it off the top of his library with the Citadel. He'll actually be gaining way more life than he's losing, and eventually gain such a large life total that he can Death Star blast the table for the win. Game review time. So in today's game, I think Trevor's deck actually struggled the most. The almost back-to-back Cyclonic Rifts kept setting him back, and he really wasn't able to cast many spells, despite being able to untap his mana after combat thanks to the Sword of Feast and Famine. Elijah's deck certainly started off very quickly, considering some of the best cards that he played early on he didn't have in his opening hand. And having the Seedborn Muse and the Vidalcan Orrery basically meant that he had everybody's turn as his own turn. Unfortunately, when you assemble a combo as powerful as that, people tend to notice it, and he was quickly dealt with. I'm not too sure what to say about the Kruphix deck in this game, considering that Dan had a bunch of ramp and a bunch of card draw at multiple points in the game. It just seemed like the only thing that he was missing were some big threatening creatures on the board, which maybe he could have found if he hadn't discarded the From Beyond earlier. I think Michael did a good job of skirting the line between being too much of a threat and dealing with other threats. By the time that he resolved his Cyclonic Rift, Dan was the main threat at that point, and I'm pretty sure everyone at the table was happy to see it. He also seemed on average to be drawing at least 2 cards a turn, so it was no wonder he was able to find and assemble his combo in the end. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.